Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of June of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The most important and the most fierce fightings and clashes are coming from Belgorod. The Russians reported that as a result of artillery duels, the Ukrainians used and launched around more than 950 shells during the previous day, starting from the 1st of June. There were a lot of explosions, a lot of fire, a lot of casualties among civilians. There were no reports about any progress, any results from the Ukrainian side of destroying Russian vehicles and so on. Just the casualties among civilians and the casualties among local people in residential areas. The Ukrainians attacked the settlements like Kozinka, Shetinovka, Belgorod was under attack. The Ukrainians attacked the small settlement Maslova Pristin. The Ukrainians attacked Shebekino one more time for the 10th time in a row, and as a result of the attack, the Russian published a video of explosion and smoke in that area. We don't have the real numbers, the real results, but the fake photo and video confirmations that we have told us that mainly the Ukrainians attacked the residential area. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians haven't made any attempts to cross the border and to attack the Russian positions. There were just the clashes along the border line. There were a few cases when the Ukrainians moved their tanks to the combat line, and from these positions they were attacking the Russians' positions in Shebekino. Later, the Russians published video confirmations of, of how they were destroying those armored vehicles using artillery system, using drones like type of Lancet and so on. And as we can see, the situation is very difficult for the Russians. One more time, we'll discuss the situation shortly. This bridgehead is perfect for the Ukrainians to attack the Russian positions, at least on three directions. The first direction is Shebekino direction. This area, the Ukrainians first of all have their own defense line along this settlement from Vovchansk to, let's say, Varvarovka. This is the first defense line, and probably the Russians currently don't have possibilities to capture or penetrate this area. Furthermore, during the day there were a lot of explosions and attacks in this direction. The Russians reported this morning that some Ukrainian forces made attempt to penetrate this area as well, but that was some kind of speculation and fake update, fake piece of news. And of course, from this bridgehead, the Ukrainians do have possibilities to support Ukrainian forces on the Kupiansk front line in this area by sending reinforcements and artillery system in direction of Dvorechny, because currently this is very hot point from the Ukrainian side, because this is the only area from this bridgehead where the Russians have some advances. Very interesting updates is coming from the Oskol River. Today the Ukrainians published a photo of bridge, pontoon bridge along this old dam. As you can see, this is a very wide place. The width of river is very big in this area, and the Ukrainians managed to build a pontoon bridge along this bridge, and using this area they are bringing and sending some reserves and reinforcements from Kharkiv to this area. And the Ukrainians are pretty flexible in this area, and they can change their location from this bridgehead, let's say, to the north of Kharkiv, and to start attacks in direction of Belgorod. Of course, the Russians currently has the same possibilities, because all the bridges in this area, everything is okay with the bridges on the Russian side of this area. But when talking about this bridge along Oskol Dam, the question I have is that this river is much wider than the river, let's say, than Dnipro River in the vicinity of Kherson. And if you remember, the Ukrainians during the previous year destroyed Antonov Bridge, and the Russians were saying that this is the reason why the Russians were forced to step back from this area, because of destroyed bridge and because of absence of possibility to support the forces. And currently we see that Ukrainians have built the bridge that is wider than that bridge that the Russians could build in Kherson. So of course, and that bridge was built by the Ukrainians, and we know that the Russian industrial potential is higher, and we see that probably there are more, at least, questions from my side than the answers to them. about this situation. Also, the Russians reported, the Ukrainians reported about a massive missile attack upon Kharkiv. A lot of explosions took part in that town, and probably that was the act of revenge and Russian response to the artillery shelling of Belgorod region. Now we are going to the Kupiansk, and before we start the situation on the ground discussing, the Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers and one ammo depot in the vicinity of Kislovka. The Russians destroyed the ammo depot of 103rd Territory Defense Brigade. This one on this map, this unit is located in this area a little bit to the south, but I believe that there are a lot of squads and battalions that are stretched along the entire Kupiansk-Liman front line. Now let's talk about Kupiansk. Let's talk about Dvorechne. The Russians reported that as a result, on the 15th of May, they managed to cross Oskol River. This is Oskol River, and the Russians managed to establish the bridgehead in the forest that located on the Ukrainian, on the western side of Oskol River, and currently the Russians managed to establish physical and fire control over this territory, over this bridgehead, over this area, over this territory, and probably the Russians managed to cut the supply and support road that goes from Kupiansk to Dvorechne, and that was the first phase of that operation. Furthermore, during the previous days, the Russians attacked and bombed the Ukrainian positions in Novomalinsk, this small settlement, and probably the main goal of those attacks was to pin down and to freeze and to not to allow the Ukrainians to make some counter-offensives in this area, and probably the goal, and the Russians reported that currently the Russians are trying to prepare a bridgehead on this side between these two settlements like Novomlinsk and Dvorechne in this area, and as soon as the Russians are able to establish this bridgehead, of course, from this area, from this territory, they will try to attack Dvorechne from the east, and of course to attack the Ukrainians in Novomlinsk from the south. So this is going to be the Russian next step. And when talking about this bridgehead, we understand that, for example, Ukrainians redeployed a lot of artillery brigades in this area, and as we discussed, currently there are 47th Artillery Brigade, 55th, 40th, and 27th Rocket Artillery Brigade in this area, and this is the reason why the Ukrainians are so fierce and why the intensifying of artillery attacks is so heavy and so high in this area. And there are a few options how the Russians can solve this issue. The first one is to start offensive operation and try to create a buffer, but we understand that the Russians don't have resources for this operation. The second option is to bring some kind of drone Lancet forces and to start anti-artillery duels, something like this, but for these purposes they will be forced to move Lancet forces, drone forces from some, let's say, Zaporozhye or Donetsk front line, where the Russians have also active offensive operations, so this is also not an option. And the third option is to take control over Dvorechne, let's say over this bridgehead, and this is exactly what the Russians are trying to develop right now, and from this bridgehead to attack the main Ukrainian artillery positions right in their back, and to create and to encircle the Ukrainian forces on this bridgehead, because from the west side there is a, let's call it a natural barrier in face of Oskol River. This is it. This is the barrier. So as you can see, the Russians don't need to to develop their bridgehead from Dvorechne right to the Russian border. They need to destroy this pontoon bridge along Oskol River, and probably they're going to do this. The bridge is located in the vicinity of Stary Saltov, and then they need to make just a few but powerful attacks in direction of Oskol River and to encircle the Ukrainian forces who are currently located on this bridgehead. So probably the Russians are trying to do this. I'm not sure that it's highly likely the Russians are able to encircle the Ukrainians, but at least if the Ukrainians lose control over Dvorechne, they will understand the Russian plans and they will be forced to step back, and currently probably to maintain the bridgehead, to maintain the combat line, and to maintain their positions in this area. Now we're moving to the south. As you can see, there are artillery duels along Kupiansk-Liman front line without any changes on the ground, and the same situation in Belogorovka. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received any updates about any losses among 81st Air Mobile Brigade or 54th Mechanized Brigade, who is currently responsible for this area. No updates from Sporna, Belogorovka. As you can see, there are no even explosions in this area. The Ministry of Defense reported that the current losses of the Ukrainians on this area during the previous 24 hours were around 60 soldiers. As you can see, the same level as it used to be, as it was yesterday and the day before. No changes. Now we are going to Bakhmut, and there is a very interesting update on Bakhmut front line. The Western sources are saying that Ukrainians redeployed Force Rapid Response Brigade as a part of National Guard in this area. So probably the Ukrainians continue the rotation process. Soon I believe they will move brigades from this area to the mainland for restoring, and they will bring some mechanized squads in this area just to be on the safe side with the fresh forces and not to allow the Russians to develop any offensive operation in direction of like Chasov Yar, Ivanovskaya, and so on. So they continue rotation process in this area as well. Now we're going to Donetsk. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation surprised us today. They reported that during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers. Probably that was some kind of mistake, and probably the Russians were talking about just Avdiivka and just Marinka, and they didn't include the Ukrainian losses on other front lines. But anyway, we see that this is the lowest level of losses since the beginning of the special military operation on this front line. The Ukrainians just lost 50 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, but interesting fact that Ukrainians lost 8 artillery systems. The Ukrainians lost 3 D-20 howitzer, 2 Grad system, 2 M777 howitzers, and 1 Palladian howitzer. So as you can see, the Russians started their active phase of storming operation of Avdiivka, of Marinka, probably of Pervomaisk, of Nitailov and Nivelskaya. And to do this, of course, first of all, the Russians need to suppress the Ukrainian artillery systems. We saw almost the same picture in October, November, and December of 2022 when the Russians just have started their offensive storming operation of Solidar and Bakhmut, and before launching the active phase of that operation, first they destroyed a lot of Ukrainian artillery systems and they gained the artillery superiority. So probably currently the Russians are doing the same. They got a lot of fresh forces like Akhmat Special Unit, like 1st Military Corps of DPR, of Russian Force, of Russian Federation, 150th Division, and many other forces in this area. And currently they're trying to suppress the Ukrainian artillery, also using the drone forces that can attack the Ukrainian artillery systems using Lancet drones and many other types of drones. And this is exactly, as you can see, everything is very complicated. The Russians are trying to suppress Ukrainian artillery. For these purposes they need, and the best solution for that is using the drone forces. The Ukrainians redeployed most of their artillery systems to the Belgorod front line, and the Russians need those drone forces there on the north, and this is a very big hook to do from one front line to another, and now they can't do anything with this, and everything is getting very complicated. But we see it's my opinion, that currently the Ukrainians managed to capture or to get initiative in their hands. So with this situation, with artillery forces, with this redeployment, and with all this situation, and I don't know what the Russians are going to do with this. Probably they have found already a solution. We'll see. Anyway, when talking about Marinka, the Russians continue advancing on the northern front, northern part along the Ivano-Franko Street, this one. And mainly this is the area of responsibilities of 5th Motorized Brigade plot, and from the other side the Special Unit Akhmat continue advancing from the south. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of artillery attacks of destroying Ukrainian positions in the western part of Marinka and Georgievka, the Russians managed to thwart the rotation attempts. So currently the Ukrainian forces that stuck in Marinka can't proceed the normal rotation, and probably soon we are going to see the piece of news that Mariinka falls and the Russians will complete the clearing of this territory. We still haven't received any updates from Avdiivka about the Russian progress between Krasnogorovka and Yasinovata. They continue telling us that the Russians continue advancing in this area, but we still haven't received any reports, any updates about the progress on the ground. Now we are going to the South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area. There were no changes on South Donetsk area, just regular artillery duels, nothing more. And when talking about Zaporozhye area, the same picture, just artillery duels. There were explosions in Zaporozhye during the previous day. There were explosions in Mala Takmachka and in the vicinity of Sherbaki. The Russians attacked Ukrainian positions and nothing more, without any changes on the ground. From the other side, there was a very powerful explosion in Berdyansk. That video was published by the Russian sources. That explosion took place in the port of Berdyansk, and the Russians used this port for supplying and supporting their forces, for bringing munition, shells, and so on. So probably that attack was made by the Ukrainian Air Forces, by Su-24, that can attack and launch the Storm Shadow missiles. And later today, the Russians reported that as a result of air defense work, they managed to shut down Ukrainian Su-25. Probably the Ukrainians attacked that Berdyansk from the Nikolaev airport, and probably that was or the Air Forces airplanes, aircrafts of 10th Navy Aviation Brigade or 299th Aviation Brigade. The Ukrainians used the tactics of pair attack. They used like a pair of Su-25 and Su-24, and if the Russians report about destroying Su-25, that means that Su-24 managed to evacuate. And in this pair, of course, Su-25 is very important, but the most important is Su-24, because Su-24 is old Soviet aircrafts that were upgraded by the Western countries, and Su-24 and MiG-29s are able to carry the missile launchers like for Storm Shadows missiles, and this is the most, in this pair, Su-24 is more important. So probably the Ukrainians attacked, and usually Ukrainians attack from Nikolaev area, from this airport. They're flying to this area, they're making attack, then they need to make a small hook and to go back, and probably on the way back home, Su-25 was shut down. So one more time, the Ukrainians can't use the airfields that located on the western part of Ukraine, because in this case the Russians will be able to spot them and they will have time to shut them down. And the closest airport that Ukrainians can use is Nikolaev. So the Ukrainians are flying in this area, they're making a small hook, and then they're going back to Nikolaev airport, or maybe they're not going to Nikolaev airport because they don't want to show their position, and maybe they're going back to the western Ukraine. So probably this is the hook the Ukrainians are doing. And from these positions, the Ukrainians usually launch their missiles in direction of Berdyansk and so on. But sometimes the Ukrainians attacks Mariupol, and in this case the Ukrainians make a bigger hook, wider hook. They need to go like to Zaporozhye, and then they're going back probably to the western part of Ukraine. And as we mentioned, as a result of reports and as a result of updates we received during the previous months, this area is the area where the Ukrainians lost significant number of their air forces, of their airplanes like Su-25 and Su-24. The Ukrainians don't have possibilities to reinforce this area with air defense systems because they've lost the last one this night. The previous night, the Russians made, let's say, the final headshot upon the Ukrainian air defense, and as a result of the previous night attack, the Ukrainians lost the last units, Patriot units. So currently the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to protect themselves. Maybe they will receive after the 20th of June for more like types of these air defense systems. Probably not. I believe they will, because the situation will get worse and worse, because after the Russians destroy the air defense systems, now the Russians can start attacking, let's say, energy facilities from the beginning, because it's summertime, the temperature is very high. So that's why the Ukrainians need more electricity in the summer period of time. So that's why the pressure upon the energy facilities is increasing every single day, and now the Russians can destroy the energy facility or start destroying one more time, and the consequences of this attack can be much bigger and much more difficult in comparison with the autumn of the previous year. The Ministry of Defense reported about Kherson area that as a result of artillery duels, the Russians destroyed Ukrainian positions on the south near Kherson of 124th Defense Brigade, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost ammo depot and armored vehicles depot with significant number of munitions and armored vehicles. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, and in the world as well. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.